Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Congratulations on making it a full month at school. You guys are doing fantastic. I miss you today, and I hope that you're doing well. So, what you're looking at now is our final day of week 4. Our learning target is still collecting and analyzing data to practice vocabulary words. Today, you're going to demonstrate your knowledge of vocabulary words. The evidence that we are learning, we have completed this week with the observations lab. Hopefully you were in class to complete that. If not, you also have the candle observations lab, which was very similar, that you could have done from home. And then we have our quiz. But the first thing I want to do is go through that candle observations lab to make sure that you know the correct answers and can check over your efforts to be sure that you're learning. So, excuse me, if we go to the classwork section of our Google Classroom and scroll down to Unit 1 assignments and open our Candle observations, that is where we will see what we did this week remotely when we weren't at school. So hopefully you have turned this in, and your score is based on effort this week. We want you to try really hard at listening and learning to listen to either a presentation, a video, a lecture, any form of input into your brain, and be able to pull key pieces of information from it. So here are the correct answers in case you may have gotten one or so not correct, to make sure that you're learning the correct information. So number 1, we had the start of the lab, and we told you exactly, between what seconds that the answers would be. So we asked for the materials he was using. He mentioned a lab sheet. You didn't have to write that. But definitely a candle, aluminum foil, a metric ruler, 2 jars, one small and one large, and a balance beam. So a balance beam, we discussed briefly in class, is a triple balance beam. It is used for measuring mass, which we might call weight in the regular world outside of science class. Number 2, the length of the candle initially started at about 6 centimeters. The weight of the candle, or mass of the candle, more accurately, is 20.4 grams. He specifically said that in this chunk of time in the video. And then the question also for number 2 asked you to describe or draw the flame of the candle. So if you were wondering how to do that here with the remote learning, you could have drawn a picture with markers or colored pencils at your home and taken a picture with your phone and uploaded it to your computer. You could have used a program such as Google Draw to also try to make it a drawing, but more virtually. Or you could have just described what you are seeing. And the scientist in the video did a pretty good job. He said, the bottom of the flame is a tiny bit blue. It was really hard to see. Blue is the hottest form of light. And then he mentioned the clearish part that fades into the yellows and oranges of a flame that we might recognize. Number 3, the experiment with the small jar. So the first time he takes the small jar and places it over the candle, and you were to describe your observations of the candle wick and the jar and flame. So whatever you said here, the candle flame went out, a slight puff of smoke came off of the end, and the jar was a little bit foggy inside. He also did say this. It did take 8 seconds for the flame to burn out. And then the second time that he did it, it only took 4 seconds for that flame to come out. Oh, that was my cat jumping over my lap. So back here to number 4, he next did the same experiment with a large jar during this time frame of the video. So if we describe what happened when the candle was put under the large jar, we might say simply that it just took longer for that flame to go out. And when we measure that time, it took about 24.3 seconds. So our final observations here in number 5, that after these trials in our experiment or procedure we're watching, the length of the candle is now 5 centimeters. And the mass or the weight of the candle is less at 19.5 grams. So the bonus question here was, what do you think happened to make that candle a little bit less in length and a little bit less in the mass or the weight? And, basic hypothesis that, maybe burning that candle resulted in the loss of mass. Possibly some of that mass could be traced to the wick or to the smoke that came off of the candle in this chemical reaction. We will talk more about that in a couple weeks. And our summary questions to kind of go over and interact more with these vocabulary words. Number 1 asked you, what is an example of a qualitative observation? So any observation you made about this candle experiment that you can see, you can hear, you can smell, hopefully you wouldn't touch the candle, but maybe even thinking about putting your hand up to it, feeling warmth. So a qualitative, again, is anything that doesn't have a number. It's a quality that you're observing. Number 2, the example of a quantitative observation is the observation with a number. In class, I wrote the words qualitative and quantitative very large on the board, and I asked you to identify the letters that were different, and you all picked out the N and the L. We spoke about how the N is the first letter in the word number. So that's our hint. As soon as you see the word quantitative, think N, number. If there's not a number in the observation, it would automatically be qualitative. So back to our candle observation, a quantitative observation could be as simple as he used 2 jars. There was 1 candle. It could be the candle went out in how many seconds. So anything that used a number is a quantity or quantitative. Number 3 was a little tricky. It asked you, what was one qualitative observation you could have made if you were actually doing this lab in person? And that means, is it something that you could observe in person that maybe we couldn't online or virtually? And that would be the sense of smell. So the smell of the candle burning would be something we could observe if we were present. And numbers 4 and 5 ask about the variables in this particular experiment. Number 4 says the manipulated variable is the jar size. It is the only thing the scientist changed throughout each time that he lit the candle. So the small jar and the large jar are your manipulated variables. He manipulated that part of the experiment to see what would happen to what he was measuring. What he was measuring is number 5, the time that it took that candle to go out. That's responding variable. It responds to what you're manipulating or changing. So anything you time or measure or change. So I hope this helps with your answers to the candle lab and candle observations. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Otherwise, you can close this out or you can replay this. And at the same time, possibly, if you follow my steps here, I'm going to take my mouse up here to the right-hand corner and minimize. And then maybe I'll pull my classwork over to a separate window. And I might open my own candle observations lab. And then I can see the answers that I wrote, since each of you have your individual, it should say your name on it once you've turned it in and submitted it. So you could listen as well as read the answers here and change or modify anything that you have currently written so that as you're taking the quiz, you have the right answers in front of you. Okay, it doesn't mean they're wrong if you're correcting it. What you're doing is modifying what you thought was the answer and learning maybe what's a better answer if you were to get any wrong. So make sure you take your time, go back if you need to, and correct any answers on your candle observation sheet. This also applies to your other assignments this week. You will notice that in part of your remote screencast from earlier this week when you were at home, I had a video that also gave you the correct answers to things such as your questions for the scientific method slides. If you would open that screencast and then listen and see the link for those correct answers, as well as look at yours next to it and modify anything that you need. These are all good preparation for the quiz. It helps refresh your memory and it helps you correct anything that you might have gotten wrong the first time. All right, I'll see you guys in just a couple minutes when you are ready to take your quiz.